The battle was over. The guns were silent. But in the rotting darkness of the Tennessee woods, the dead and the dying were not alone. Some of the wounded were glowing. A faint blue-green light rising from open wounds, pulsing softly in the rain. This is the story of what crawled out of the earth at Shiloh and quietly saved lives that had no right to be saved. April 7, 1862. The Confederate Army dissolved into the mist toward Corinth. The Union held the field. But there was no cheering. No sense of triumph. The ground looked like the surface of another planet. Trees stripped bare by a hurricane of lead. The air thick with the copper smell of blood and black powder and something worse. The smell of men already starting to decay in the Tennessee heat. And everywhere, the wounded. Nearly 23,000 men. Killed, wounded, or missing. In 2 days. On one patch of ground. The number didn't just shock the country. It broke something in it. Whatever idea of glory this war had carried, Shiloh buried it in the mud. Night fell over the carnage. A cold rain came in. Slow and relentless. Soaking into the earth. Soaking into the men who could not move. There were no field hospitals built for this scale of suffering. No system. No plan. The medical corps was overwhelmed before it began. So the wounded simply lay there. In the blackness. In the mud. Some calling for their mothers. Some past calling for anything. Hours passed. And then the soldiers who were still conscious saw it. A light. Faint at first, easy to dismiss as fever or madness. Blue-green. Soft. Impossibly beautiful in the middle of all that horror. It was coming from the wounds. Open flesh, torn by mini balls and bayonets. Was shining in the dark. Like something lit from within. Like something alive. The story moved through the field like wildfire. And the men who had it, the ones whose wounds glowed, seemed to survive at higher rates than those who didn't. Their wounds healed cleaner. Faster. Against all odds. Against all logic. Against everything medicine knew in 1862. Against all odds. Against all logic. Against everything medicine knew in 1862. The soldiers gave it a name. The Angel's Glow. For nearly 140 years, it lived as a ghost story. A campfire legend. The kind of thing you half believe and never quite explain. Then, in 2001, a 17-year-old named Bill Martin was visiting the Shiloh battlefield with his family. His mother was a microbiologist. He asked her a question she couldn't immediately answer. What if the glow was real? What if something in this soil was actually doing it? He went home and ran the experiment. A high school science project. He won first place at the Intel International Science and Engineering Fair. Because he was right. Deep in the soil around Shiloh lives a bacterium called Photorhabdus luminescens. It is bioluminescent. It glows blue-green in the dark. And it thrives in exactly one set of conditions: cold, wet, and deep in the earth. April 1862. Cold rain. Men lying in the mud with open wounds, their body temperatures dropping through the night. Their flesh became a perfect home. But here is where it stops being strange and becomes almost miraculous. Photorhabdus luminescens doesn't just glow. It produces a chemical arsenal. Compounds that actively destroy other bacteria. The ones that caused gangrene. Sepsis. The infections that killed more Civil War soldiers than bullets ever did. The bacterium was acting as a primitive antibiotic nearly a century before penicillin existed. The men whose wounds glowed were being treated by the earth itself. Think about that for a moment. In a war where surgeons amputated limbs by the thousands because they had no other way to stop infection. Where a man who survived a battle might still die a week later from a wound that barely bled. Something in the Tennessee soil was doing what medicine couldn't. Not chosen. Not engineered. Not prayed into existence. Just there. Waiting in the dark. Doing what it had always done. And on the worst night in the history of that ground, it found them. After Shiloh, nothing was the same. For Grant and Sherman, the masks had come off completely. They had seen the real face of the war. Not flags and cavalry charges and tactical genius, but bodies in the mud and infection and the slow grinding cost of staying alive. Grant would press deeper south. Sherman would eventually march to the sea, burning everything in his path. Not out of cruelty, but out of a cold calculation Shiloh had taught him. That mercy prolonged the dying.
The war had changed. The men who fought it had changed. And the place called Shiloh, the place named for peace, had become the dividing line between the war America imagined and the war America got. We remember Shiloh for the numbers, for the carnage, for the turning point, but somewhere in that story, in a part nobody planned and nobody could explain, a few hundred men lay in the freezing mud with glowing wounds, staring up at a lightning-split sky. They didn't know why they were glowing. They didn't know what was happening inside their flesh. They just knew that something, in the middle of all that darkness, was keeping them alive. The angel's glow, not a miracle, not a legend. Just the earth, doing what the earth has always done, quietly, without glory, without a name, taking care of its own. Like, share, and subscribe for more history.